It's a pleasure to be here with you for a glass of port with our guests in our Instagram. And we have joining us today Mark Bright from Anglers and Saison Hospitality in California. And we're going to enjoy having a good conversation and sharing some experiences of a very seasoned and expert sommelier, but who joined my ranks as a winemaker. And so we will be sharing experiences likewise. And I look forward to Mark putting some questions of his own to me. But so here in Portugal, we're midway through our growing season. It's been quite a difficult start to the season, but temperatures warmed up in the last couple of weeks. We're actually facing a few threats from thunderstorms, which is something which always has us on our edge. But we're looking forward to a good 2020 season. Obviously for us, during all of these troubled times, the vines don't stop growing, so we've had to keep active and working through this. But fortunately, things are calming down. But in the vineyards, things are still very, very busy. Actually, quite an interesting day today. I spent my morning in a granite quarry. That's why I'm looking a bit red in the face at the moment. But in fact, we're looking at renewing our granite lagars where we foot tread our grapes at one of our wineries. And so as a winemaker, I get to become a bit of a stone man this morning, choosing the granite that we will carve into these new granite lagars, which is so important for the production of our port. It's a very empirical, quite simple method of making port, but it's incredibly effective. And in fact, one of the Mark, you're online.
Hello.
Okay. Well,
nice to see you
welcome.
Again.
Good to see you, and good morning to you. And thanks for joining us. And I was just saying a few words at how, with your now experienced career as a sommelier, you now joined my ranks as a winemaker. And probably one of the first questions I'd like to put to you is now, since 2013, being a winemaker, did that change the way you look at wine?
Oh, absolutely. It changed a lot. When I started producing wine, it was one of those, it was a step really for me that I wanted to get a better understanding of wine itself. And not just in a restaurant setting, not just in a tasting setting. As a sommelier, I wanted to go deeper and understand more about it. And I always believed, because I had I was trained in apprenticeship, I always believe experience is the most important thing to learn about a certain topic. So I said, I'm going to go out there and make my own wines. And, I made some mistakes. I made some good wines. I made some bad wines. I've learned so much from it. And I've really found a really deep love and appreciation for the difficulty in farming and the difficulty in production. But more than anything, I've understood how much, how we are at the mercy of Mother Nature. And really, when you have a vineyard and you have a very difficult vintage, how much you have to put into that wine, it really gives me a lot more appreciation for your art form. And, especially for someone that's producing such high quality wines on such a larger scale, how much, I know how much attention and detail goes into it. So I'm very appreciative of the work you do.
Well, Mark, I appreciate that. And I hope you become a bit softer on us after that experience. But you're completely right. We learn to work with nature, and I guess one of the advantages that I have here in the Douro Valley is that we're in a region which has been producing port now for over 300 years. And myself, having grown up as sixth generation winemaker, having grown up here, we do have the benefit of a lot of trial and error. And I think yourself in the Santa Cruz Mountains, you're actually discovering a lot of things yourself for the first hand. And earlier, I appreciate you're planting some vineyards at the moment. over the 7 years now of your project, have you changed a lot the way you look at the varieties that you work with and the different parcels?
Oh, yes, definitely. And it's funny because I get a chance to speak about this a lot because we're doing kind of like a virtual tasting room. So we do Zoom meetings with people where we send wine out to them. And it's interesting because I talk about the winemaking and the decision-making process for me from when I started producing wine to now is almost completely different. When I started to produce wine, I went in, with a lot of information and a lot of learning from different regions of the world that I've got a chance to visit, such as Portugal and Spain and France. And I took all of this information from what I've learned and I tried to apply it to the Santa Cruz Mountains. And the one thing I've learned is that, I'm not in Europe, I'm in Santa Cruz. So I've had to learn to adjust my philosophies to what the vineyard's really going to perform. The types of oak that I use are completely different. I use a lot less oak now than I did at the beginning because the wines here, it's a cold region. They don't absorb new oak barrels as other parts of California do. So I've had to learn to adjust that. And, I've also learned a lot about stems. And that's been, I only understand 1% of what I'm doing as winemaking. So, I mean, it's going to be a lifetime journey.
Right, we have some communication difficulties at the moment here, Mark. But I'm not sure if on the other side your comments are being heard by others. But something for us, the use of tawny ports as with vintage port. But also, I can share with you an experience that I had in my career now, 30 years back home, winemaking, was that I explaining to you the importance of your seeds sitting on the surface of a lagar after you've done the initial treading. And that for him was very much an empirical rule. But it's very interesting that I've been able over time to actually give a proper scientific explanation to that. And the seeds in a grapeberry have got a very important quantity of tannin, and that tannin is very important to stabilize your color. Now, when your seeds are sitting on the surface, the waxy layer that's holding those tannins in gets broken down and releases the tannins into your fermentation. So there is no doubt that in an old world like region like the Douro Valley, we do have a lot of empirical practices which are sacred to our way of winemaking. But then time has also, and science today has actually given technical explanations why those empirical practices were held. Now, we continue here, unfortunately, with Mark offline, but the other area that I'd like to probably share with you, and that was certainly something that I was talking with Mark earlier, is about in mountain viticulture where the character of the location is so important. And if those of you who have been to the Douro Valley before, or even if you've actually seen images of the Douro Valley is a region of mountain viticulture. And in mountain viticulture, the character of the wines that you produce in different vineyards varies so much. And in the port trade, a port house, the style of a port house, the style of a vintage port, will be very much influenced by the what we call the quintas, which are the estates belonging to each port house. So for Taylor's has three very distinguished estates, what we call quintas. Quinta de Vargelas, which is a property in the upper Douro, which has got a very distinct personality. And then the ports from Vargelas have got this very, very distinctive, very violet, very firm tannins, very, very elegant. But when we're blending for a Taylor vintage port, we'll be also using very important ports that we produce from Taylor's two other properties in the Pinhão Valley, Quinta de Terra and Quinta do Junco. Well, the Pinhão Valley is in the central part of the Douro, and it produces port with a very rich fruit, very round, very supple fruit. And these combine very well together when we're making a Taylor Classic. But one of the great success stories of port in the last 30 years has been very much the interest that has been in our single Quinta vintage ports, which these are ports which are produced from these very distinct ports from the famous estate of Quinta de Vargelas, for its very distinctive from Quinta Terra with its rich fruitiness, and those ports there have got very much their own character. Now, we have lost Mark for a few minutes, so the winemaker's been put on the spot, but you're back, Mark.
I'm sorry about that. For some reason, I don't know why I have an issue with the internet, so I just came up next to the router. I also have a nice view now. So
wonderful.
In the
Well, I don't know if you heard any of my. That's right. I don't know if you heard any of my comments about talking about the comparisons of you yourself being in the mountain and very much your site-specific wines with the Douro Valley. But okay, we've used up a few of our precious minutes. So tell me about your experience with port, and when did port become important in your work as a sommelier?
Well, for me, my training when it came to wine, it began in Bellagio in Las Vegas. We had a very intense wine program there. So we always had all the offerings that we ever needed from all the major producers of port. And there was always a staple for us in the restaurants. But, something that I learned when I was just beginning my studies, it was always kind of the mindset that port is a dessert wine. And then I've learned over a course of time and experimentation with pairings and with food that, for me, port is yes, a different style of wine, but it's not a dessert wine. It is, some of it can be sweet wine. And I've had a chance to really experiment with it and apply it to so many different layers of a menu, and so many different times of a guest experience, whether it's an aperitif or a pairing with a savory course, or if it is at the end of the meal with a sweet course, the pairing itself in a more traditional way that people think about it. It's an absolutely critical tool for a sommelier to have in his program. No programs can complete without a good arrangement, and not just port itself, but the different styles of port, because you can apply them in so many different ways. It's really, really, you need to have it in your program. I don't know why.
Port is a category of fortified wine, but when you look within port, I think you'd separate port into the two main categories being vintage port and tawny ports, and the vintage being very much your fruit driven, your intensity, your richness, and your tawny ports. Your tawny ports are aged in wood in an oxidative manner, so you get a lot of nuttiness, dried fruit. And those two styles of port, being the most distinctive, give you a lot of different combinations, different opportunities to get enjoyment out of it. And very much, all sommeliers play a very important role for us in making the consumer feel comfortable, because port is undoubtedly delicious, but if you're not familiar in how to enjoy it, well then we will always think twice about doing it, or we don't want to make a fool of ourselves in front of guests. But when you do the suggestion, people will really get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So tell me a couple of your experiments with port as an adventures, other than the natural, which is with your dessert. What have you tried with which you've found actually quite different?
Yeah, there's a couple examples that I've used before. Although I mean, when the last time we spoke, I know that you're explaining that dish, the seared foie gras and the
Yes.
chilled port, which sounds amazing. I'm
Very,
still thinking
very
about it to this
chilled.
day.
Tail Fladgate 30-year-old. It is amazing.
No,
And
that's
I'm not
great.
biased. No.
Yeah, no bias at all. Some of the things that I found successful with port, and especially for me, is utilizing maybe not the oldest vintage port, and maybe using it a little bit younger. So there's a lot more of kind of like a shocking brightness to the wine, and the texture of younger port is really critical, I think, because the sharpness of the acidity really stands out, and it's great with food. One of the dishes I've used is there was a dish that we did with beets and bone marrow that Josh did years ago. We haven't had it on the menu for a long time. I'll never forget this dish. But with a more acidic style of ruby port and a younger ruby port, the natural sweetness of the beets, and then they were cooked with this kind of like an XO sauce, kind of like a fish sauce, and it has a bone marrow that's seared. So you have this crunchy. It's almost kind of like the foie gras when you talk about seared foie gras, because the softness and the richness of the bone marrow, but it's the sweetness of the beet and the richness of the bone marrow together actually made it a fantastic young vintage ruby port pairing.
I will do two recommendations there. The Fonseca Bin 27, which is a staple in California, one that my father dedicated a lot of his working life showing to many consumers. And Bin 27 is what I call the perfect young vintage port. Don't be scared of drinking a vintage port young. But what this port has, which is exactly what you say, is that a young port will have a lot of rich, sweet berry fruit, but then the tannin that it has will make the finish dry. And one of the secrets to any sweet wine is it's got to taste sweet, but it's got to finish dry. And port does that beautifully. What the balance of tannins and the natural, the higher alcohol level of port balances that sweetness. So that when it comes to food pairings, if your port was too sweet or it was cloying, it would take over any pairing there. But yes, the Fonseca Bin 27, I can imagine that combination you've done there. The richness of it will balance, then the tannin will make it finish dry and make you want to go for another forkful.
Yeah, no, that was a great pairing, and there was a dish a long time ago that I kind of experimented. Some of my first experimentation with savory food and port was with the tuna. There's a dish. This is a long time ago. This is actually a Michael Mina dish that worked out really well with it. And this is, I mean, we're talking. Yeah, I was experimenting with this almost 20 years ago. Hard to believe I've been doing this for a couple decades. I can only imagine 6 generations. But,
that make you turn to winemaking, did it?
But yeah, I mean, because we had so it was a seared foie gras. I mean, it was a seared tuna, and the tuna was cooked. It was rare on the inside, but it was seared, so you had the crispy outside, and then it was covered in a reduction, a red wine reduction sauce. That was really, it was a very dense reductive sauce. So it actually texturally worked really well with the ruby port. Once again, a younger ruby port, not an older vintage port that we poured. I think it was a late bottle vintage. What were we pouring back then? I mean, that would have been 20 years ago. So that would have been 2005. So we were probably pouring something in the late 90s, probably 97 or 98 if I remember correctly.
Sure.
It's probably what we were pouring at that time. I remember, and that's a pairing that stands out in my mind quite a bit. So I mean, it's not something.
The late bottle vintage. Yes.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The late bottle vintage have a bit of extra maturity than your younger, been 27. So you start getting a bit more of a cassis fruit developing there, and then also the tannin mellows a bit. But we should also talk about the tawny ports. They've got the tail flageolet 40-year-old, and the richness of the tawny aging makes it, as it ages, it evaporates and it concentrates. And the tawny ports have got so much richness that they will balance with anything which is spicy, some of the Asian influence. And it's so intense from there that there are not many wine pairings that you can use from your spicier or very rich spice foods. And the tawny ports, the tawny is, whereas ruby is red and fruit, tawny is brown, it is nutty, dried fruit. As they age, the tannins, they soften out. They become very creamy, very soft. And these are also another a very versatile port to work with.
Yeah, I know I just with the multiple different styles of port that are out there. For me, I've always enjoyed tawny ports more. For like if I were to pick ruby port or tawny port, and I'm gonna have it at home, and that's the only port I'm gonna drink for the rest of my life, I'd probably pick tawny. I love the depth of flavor. I love the length and the reach that it pulls out of the back palate. And it's also something that we utilize quite a bit. We utilize a lot of tawny port. We also utilize Madeira, and we kind of bounce back and forth. But for us, it's Saison and an Angler, because all of our cooking is based off of the fire and embers. We even some of our sweeter dishes at the end are all going to be cooked with the fire. And we have a soft serve ice cream there, and we've changed the type of ice cream and what we used previously, but we always have in-house a handmade caramel, and it's a smoked caramel with the embers. And I'm sorry, but like the 40-year bottle that you have there, and that caramel is just phenomenal. It just doesn't get better.
Don't apologize.
Yeah, it doesn't get better. And it's funny. I got a chance to taste the 40-year tawny just last week. We were able to procure some from your distributor here in California, and we used it for an event. That same exact port. Phenomenal.
And these ports, the tawny ports, where you get the art of the blender, because I've been back home now for 30 years, so I can now say I actually made the base wine for the 30 years. But the 40-year-old, that was made by a generation. The base wines are made by a generation before. But these wines are taken care of by us in our cellars, and they are blended to perfection. And the tawny ports, I sometimes call them the no-brainers. You don't focus so much on what the wine is about. You'll respect the work that we have done for it to be good and always good, and you get so much enjoyment. Where I'd say the contrast to there would be your vintage port, and the vintage port is the sort of port that, and I have a 2016 Fonseca, because the vintage port will be bottled 2 years after the harvest. A vintage port will be a time capsule of the character of that year, the 2016 year, the vineyards, in the case of Fonseca, the Fonseca vineyards, and that wine that was made. It will then age for many years in the bottle, be incredibly young and fresh when it's young, and then develop. So the vintage port, you'll probably open when you've got a group of friends who wants to have a good chat about the wine and all that. So you can choose a different port either for a different dish or a different occasion. And Mark, and you were saying that you find with your restaurants many occasions to serve port. I know port very much complements the work that you do. So you're faithful to our port.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. For you personally, like for me, if I'm at home, I'm gonna drink a tawny port. That's just what my palate enjoys. For you, what do you drink at home?
I'll drink a tawny port if I'm in a more casual sense. If I'm a group of friends who are talking about anything other than wine, but I will have if I've got a dinner with some friends I want to create a special occasion. I'll go and get a bottle of vintage. Then we will go, we'll enjoy that, discover it, we'll polish that off, and then we'll move over to the tourney just to lubricate the conversation as we carry on into the evening. So,
Got it.
very much so. You know, it's there's a part of enjoying the different taste, and there's a part of choosing the right moment.
Absolutely. That's a great way of terming it. And one of the things I really appreciate when you describe some of your wines is you talk about the temperature that they're being served.
Yes,
Because
yes,
a lot of times people forget that the temperature of whatever you're drinking, whether it's champagne, white wine, red wine, port, it's absolutely critical in the delivery of the wine to the palate. And it can change the entire experience if it's not managed correctly.
totally. Thank you, Mark, for bringing that.
Yeah.
Two things. The wine glass. Well, I'm actually in my tasting room, and we use quite a small tasting glass, so ignore this glass. But key, port wine, it's a wine. Half of the pleasure that you get in any glass of wine is the aromas. So use a normal wine glass for your port. And a white wine glass is probably what I'd use frequently. And then temperature, key. We're now entering your warmer months in California, and grab a bottle of 20-year-old Tawny, put it in the fridge, and have a drink. That you can just drink that even outside of the meal. A chilled Tawny, where what you do is you subdue the alcohol, but that rich nuttiness comes out. It is incredible, and so don't take my word for it. Go out and try it yourself. And Mark, I'll probably give you a moment. I know we've run out of time a bit quickly, but I really appreciate you having come on board. And please, let you close with some comments from yourself. And I'd love to receive you out here, and we can talk some winemaking in the vineyard.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I'm very thankful to be here on this call with you. Thank you for the time and the invitation. I really love what you guys are doing. With all your vineyards, with all of your wines. I've always worked with your ports. They've been there for me in consistency of quality across the board for the last 20 years, and I'm just really glad we got a chance to get together and just chat a little bit about wine. But I would really prefer to do it in Portugal with you. I can tell you that now. Have no worries.
More than welcome.
Soon as we can get back on planes international. I mean, I think we can, but as soon as
Yes.
my wife feels
We'll let
comfortable
you.
enough with sending me back to Europe, then I'm going to come out there and see you. I have no doubt about that.
I look forward to it. Portugal's a wonderfully safe country to be in, and fortunately, it's gone well here. So take care and have a great build up also to your next harvest. And I'll plan to come and discover Santa Cruz, which I've never been to before. So take care.
You'll be in my
Pleasure
hands for
talking
the
to you.
day, okay?
Done. Deal. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.